Excellent. So welcome back, everybody, to the last session of the day today. I guess some of you are a bit exhausted by now, but we have, again, a very exciting block. So I hope for the next 1.5 hours we can really give you something to chew on and to discuss and to stimulate you to follow us in these topics around the area dealing with unmet medical needs and support to innovation. So we are back to human medicines in this block now, after you have heard the details of the veterinary medicines. And as the chair was actually saying at the end of the first session, we are working a lot with developers. It's important to work with developers to optimize their development programs in the interest of patients. And that's actually really this area here. So I'm trying to bridge from the very first session to the very last one of today in order to make that leap. So we have 4 different presentations. And again, I have colleagues here who are working in these areas, who are working in these fields here at the agency, and who give you firsthand experience, and I will introduce all these colleagues to you. The structure, the objectives of each of the presentation are the same as we had earlier in the day. So without further ado, I would like to go to the first presentation, which will be given by Stina Arum on guidance for R&D programs, scientific advice, and the PRIME framework. We heard about this previously. Let me introduce Stina to you. She's a medical doctor from Karolinska Institute. She has a PhD in medical genetics. She's worked as a hospital doctor and investigator in clinical trials before joining in 2007, so already 10 years now, the agency here in the area of scientific advice and orphan drugs, and she's working in the area of scientific advice today. So with this introduction, Stina, you're best placed to give us background on scientific advice, how it works, and the PRIME framework. Over to you.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for the opportunity to tell you about scientific advice and protocol assistance. In this presentation, I will speak about the scope, value, and current developments in scientific advice, such as parallel EMA-HTA scientific consultation, about the qualification of novel methodologies and biomarkers, modeling and simulation, and finally I will introduce you to the priority medicines scheme, and with that I would like to make this introduction already as briefly mentioned by Michael. This figure illustrates the typical long road of bringing medicines to the patients. And to the right, you can see the regulatory assessment at the end of a development that is done by the CHMP and the EMA, and the approval by the European Commission. In Europe, this is then followed by reimbursement discussions and launch of the product before patients can get access to the new medicine. This is a long and expensive process, and therefore we have regulatory provisions such as scientific advice and the PRIME scheme in place that target the risk of development and time to access. Scientific advice was started in 1996 to improve the communication between developers of medicines and regulators. The legal basis is in the Regulation 726 from 2004, which says that one of the tasks of the agency is to advise undertakings on the conduct of the various tests and trials to demonstrate the quality, safety, and efficacy of medicinal products. And in scientific advice, we advise on the scientific requirements for marketing authorization, most commonly before the first marketing authorization, when companies ask questions on manufacturing, non-clinical and clinical trials, risk management plans, ways to develop generics, hybrids, and biosimilars. We also may have specific questions how to develop the product for specific populations, such as rare diseases or pediatric patients. After the first initial marketing authorization, we can, in scientific advice, discuss extensions of indications to different age groups and stages of disease into a different condition and safety aspects. Scientific advice for human medicines is given by the Committee for the Medicinal Products for Human Use, CHMP, on the recommendation of the Scientific Advice Working Party. It is prospective in nature. It focuses on development strategies rather than pre-evaluation of data to support the marketing authorization application. It is voluntary and non-binding. This is a figure that illustrates the Scientific Advice Network. In its core, we have the Scientific Advice Working Party, which is a multidisciplinary expert group. This is supported by Scientific Secretariat here at the EMA, and we can also involve external experts and clinicians when needed, and we also collaborate with the CHMP and other agency committees and working parties. We commonly also involve patients, and we can also involve HTA bodies in scientific advices. The Scientific Advice Working Party has experts from national authorities, universities, and hospitals that are selected for their expertise in a specific field of medicine or methodology. We also have joint members across committees, not only the CHMP, but also other agency committees. And the Secretariat here at the EMA provides scientific and logistics support to the Scientific Advice Working Party. We are medical doctors, pharmacists, and assistants. What is the impact of scientific advice? Scientific advice can help to guide changes in the pivotal clinical development. And this study that was published in 2015 studied all the marketing authorizations between 2008 and 2012. There were 118 of those, and looked at the conclusions of the initial scientific advice and if they were acceptable or not. And then this was further, they were also then followed to see whether they had complied with the advice given with regards to the primary efficacy endpoint, the comparator, and the statistical analysis plan. The results were then compared with the marketing authorization application outcome. And the results showed that obtaining and complying with scientific advice is strongly associated with a positive outcome of a marketing authorization application. Almost 90% of those who obtain and follow scientific advice receive a positive opinion, compared to 40% of those who do not follow the given advice. Scientific advice and the protocol assistance, which is the same as scientific advice but for orphan drugs, has turned out to be a popular procedure in the agency. And you can in this figure see how the numbers have been increasing year by year, and last year we had nearly 600 scientific advices. I would then move on to the parallel EMA HTA scientific consultation. The starting point for this type of parallel advices was that the newly licensed medicines do not reach all patients in need. And one reason for this is that the developers have not been able to address the information needs for the health technology body assessment. The regulators look at the quality, safety, and efficacy of the product, while the HTAs and the payers, they need data on the relative effectiveness and cost effectiveness, the added value of the new treatment. So we answer different questions, and therefore we also have different requirements in terms of evidence. The aim of the parallel advices is that we would like to have the decision makers coming together early to discuss the data generation. So it's possible to discuss the planned development, including population, comparator, design of the trial, and endpoint, as well as the requirements for post-licensing evidence generation. And in the best case, we can have an optimized development plan that generates evidence for for both stakeholders, and this would ultimately improve the access for patients. For those of you who are interested studying this more in detail, I would recommend this scientific paper from last year, which studied the time it takes from the EU regulatory approval to national HTA and pricing and reimbursement decisions for oncology products. And as you can see from the table at the bottom, it takes a number of months before this decision is taken. What constitutes success in these parallel consultations? These discussions were initiated in 2010, and there has been many positive steps forward since then. There is a good understanding of the different roles and remits and standards of each other. There is a common language, and we understand each other's methodologies, and we can also agree on the science. But the results or the evidence that is generated may need to be differently applied. What is really the most important success from the parallel consultations is to agree on a development plan that is practically feasible but still generates evidence without undue delay for the different purposes, and really to avoid sequential thinking. And the alignment of the EU regulators and HTA's bodies has been studied in this publication from last year. Then I would like to move to another topic, which is qualification of novel methodologies and biomarkers. The legislation does not only allow us to give advice on a specific development of a product, but we can also discuss broader topics, such as more efficient ways to develop drugs, development of new endpoints for clinical trials. In the qualification of novel methodologies procedures, we have, for example, have had cases to discuss methods to predict toxicity, how to enrich a patient population based on a biomarker for a specific disease. We can discuss surrogate clinical endpoints as well as patient and caregiver reported outcomes. This type of procedure can either lead to a qualification advice, which gives advice on how to further develop the method towards a qualification. Ultimately, a qualification opinion is on the acceptability of a specific use of, for example, a biomarker in a research and development context based on the assessment of submitted data. And these applicants are either consortia, networks, public-private partnerships, learned societies, as well as pharmaceutical industry. And since 2008, we have had 117 procedures. Then next, I would like to speak about modeling and simulation. Modeling and simulation is very much about PK/PD. And industry uses this to make their development more efficient, while for regulators it may help to understand, for example, the chosen dose, dosing schedule, and generally to understand where the company comes from. In the early discussions in scientific advice, we can have modeling and simulation discussions to discuss certain details of a clinical trial or how to develop the product for the pediatric patient population, for example. At the time of marketing authorization, this can support benefit-risk decisions by investigating uncertainties and untested scenarios and their clinical consequences. It can also be used, for example, to support subgroup analysis. Post-marketing, it is most commonly used in the life cycle management of products when there is a question of changing the posology of the product, for example. Finally, I would like to introduce to the Priority Medicines PRIME scheme. This is a scheme to give enhanced scientific and regulatory support for innovative medicines that target unmet medical needs. And the legal base is accelerated assessment, so the criteria for PRIME are the same as for accelerated assessment. And that means that we really want to have medicinal products of major public health interest, and in particular from the viewpoint of therapeutic innovation. In the evaluation, the first step is to look at the unmet medical need. If there is nothing authorized for the patient population in question, or if there is something, where would this unmet medical need lie, and how well this product could target the existing unmet medical need. For the product, we would require to have a scientific justification, a scientific rationale to use this product in the disease in question. We would look at the data and evidence that is available that would support the unmet medical need, the efficacy of the product. We have two different entry points into the scheme. Any sponsor can apply, and this is also where we see the majority of the applications coming in at the proof of concept stage. We would like to have a sound pharmacological rationale. We would look at the clinical response in efficacy and safety normally in exploratory trials. And we would expect to see a substantial improvement and in the endpoints, and the results would need to be clinically relevant and of convincing magnitude and duration. For sponsors that are small and medium-sized enterprises or academia, sponsors who commonly need more support, we also have an earlier entry possibility, which is at proof of principle stage. And here we would need to have a non-clinical proof of principle data together with tolerability in first-in-man trials. For those products that are accepted into the PRIME, we offer the potential for accelerated assessment, early CHMP rapporteur appointment, and we offer a kick-off meeting with the rapporteur and the multidisciplinary expertise from the EU network, where the scientific expectations and regulatory strategies can be discussed. This is then normally expected to be followed by enhanced scientific advices at key development milestones. And we also have EMA-dedicated contact point, and we offer fee incentives for small, medium-sized enterprises and academics on scientific advice. Since the launch of PRIME scheme last year, we have had more than 120 eligibility requests. We have granted the eligibility for 28 products. More than half of these come from small and medium-sized enterprises, and we also see a lot of advanced therapy products. And the most common therapeutic field is oncology. So in summary, scientific advice is agency's key tool to promote the collection of robust data on the benefits and risks of medicines. It benefits patients as it promotes the generation of robust data and protects them from participating in badly designed or irrelevant clinical trials. It is the key platform for our collaboration with health technology assessment bodies, which aims to facilitate patients' access to new medicines, and it is also a central activity to stimulate innovation. And we have the regulatory incentive via PRIME, which is possible for medicinal products of major public health interest, and in particular from the viewpoint of therapeutic innovation. Thank you.
Excellent, Stina. Thanks so much for a very, very concise presentation of this area, which is really at the heart of development support and shaping development programs in view of initial licensing and subsequent extension of the license. It's really a very broad spectrum of what has been discussed in scientific advice. And it also links, and that's very important to also realize, it links with the other areas within the agency, within the regulatory network quite well. Meaning you heard today about the orphan medicines, you heard about pediatric medicines. You may wonder, well, how is this interlinked? And scientific advice, for example, is liaising closely with the pediatric committee, with the Committee for Orphan Medicine Product on Significant Benefit questions. So there is quite a lot of networking which is behind. And then from the external also, in terms of other decision makers, you've seen that with the outreach to HTA bodies, there is an opportunity here to ensure that there are development programs which are optimized, as well as a lot of clinical expert and patient input which has been received. So it is a very dynamic area, I should say, and it's a very important area to steer development in the right direction in the interest of patients, and that's I think what you displayed quite nicely, Stina. Thank you. Any questions on this part? Yes, please.
Yes, Andreas Balsik from Swissmedic. You were talking about parallel EMA and HTA scientific consultation, and I was wondering why not joint scientific consultation? Do you think about that? Isn't it possible on a regulation basis, or what's the hindrance there?
Well, I think it's partly an issue of naming, but lately there have been we have actually changed the name from parallel scientific advice to parallel scientific consultation, and this is because the HTAs have recently become very well organized, and they work together within themselves. And we do then have the consultation. It is actually in the same advice. We have questions that are addressed to the CHMP. We may have questions that are addressed both to the CHMP and the HTAs. And we also have in the same documentation questions that are addressed only to the HTAs. And we will get together and discuss all this in the same room in a meeting with the company and with the HTAs. So this is how it works.
Maybe
actually it's a joint.
Yeah, exactly. A clarification. It doesn't mean that it happens at two different times. It is at the same time. Parallel is a legacy of what we did with the FDA. It just highlights the fact that we remain with independent advice at the end. And because our criteria are different and we're not responsible for HTA assessment, we cannot say that we do a joint, meaning that we would work together to a common position. We can have different positions, but we will work together to, at the end, there is a joint outcome, but not a single outcome, if you could see the difference I make. But it's just a question of naming rather than actually it does take at the same place with people all in the same room.
Any further question? Yes, please.
Mehwish Siddiqui from the U.S. Embassy, London. So do you collaborate with, global health agencies like the WHO or even, local agencies which work on development like DFID? They have these grand challenges on AMR and cancer research and the like. They have the same priority areas. So is there any synchronization with them? My second question actually is whether at the proof of concept stage, do you accept animal models or the clinical trials have to be done on humans? The research that is being done. So those are my two questions.
So do you mean with both about in prime or in scientific advice?
Oh, sorry, this is for prime. So for instance, say, butatoxin, which is a snake poison, it's been seen in some animal models to reduce oncogene development or is basically depresses the metastasizing of cancer cells. And that's in animal models. Could that be considered something that you would invest in, or you have to see something in human models?
Well,
or HeLa cells, that sort of thing.
So, well, if I start with the first question, that was about the collaboration with the WHO, for example. We sometimes have contact with the WHO in scientific advice. I have not seen this happening in PRIME so far, and PRIME is also scheduled to be a very dynamic, short procedure. So this has not happened, and we would evaluate the unmet medical need on a case-by-case basis, looking at the epidemiological data of the disease or the medical urgency. Then the second was about the Yes, exactly. Yes. So proof of principle data, we would need to. We have accepted, I think, one product based on the early stage, and there we had convincing efficacy in a relevant animal model of the disease, together with first-in-man tolerability data. Then this is really the experience we have so far. We evaluate on a case-by-case basis, and I wouldn't like to comment on the specific case that you mentioned.
I can maybe add a few things. We work with WHO, especially on product for which we will give a scientific opinion in the context of what we call Article 58, which will be explained tomorrow. But we don't work necessarily with DFID or a organization like this. We may use their experts if we need expertise in a particular area, but we would have to engage with all organizations in all member states at the same level. So we tend to go for European. What we need is expertise. We don't need organization. Yes, they share some, of course, unmet needs are not our property. They are shared and identified. We may look at their views in terms of unmet needs, but this is not the essential of what we do. And remember, we're always subject to an application being made to us. We are not unfortunately, we cannot get to a company and say, work for us and do this. The second point is, I know what you're referring to, because the US FDA has a legislation which allows to receive product when there are no human data, especially in the case of terrorism, biowarfare, and so on. We do not have a specific provision, a similar provision in our legislation, but if needed, we would certainly consider a situation. Yes, I know the time. We would certainly consider, but this is a very specific case.
Okay, thanks. Maybe two more quick questions, quick answers, because otherwise I'm worried you don't get to a networking and you might be exhausted as well. So, yes, for you first.
Thank you. I'm Bernice Mwale from Zambia. I wanted to know how you ensure objectivity for applicants who don't take your advice but later on apply, especially in clinical trials. Thank you.
So the advice that is given, it's non-binding and it's voluntary. So certainly not all applicants that come for the marketing authorization, not all of them have used the possibility of scientific advice. We only recommend it because we think that it can improve the possibilities of a successful outcome for the marketing authorizations, but we treat them all equally.
At the time of marketing authorization, we look at the results, whatever they were, how they were obtained. Do they match what we need? It's independent of whether or not they have seen scientific advice.
And maybe just to add, this slide is extremely important also in this context presented by Stina earlier, where it's not just about getting scientific advice, but also adhering to it. And in this case, it's the compliance part, which has then higher likelihood of being successful in the marketing authorization process. So that's also a very important analysis from that perspective. And I think I saw a question with you. Yeah.
It's just a quick question. So under PRIME, does that include ability to approve a product based on a surrogate, or is that primarily focused on a more accelerated assessment of the application once submitted, plus all of the interactions with EMA over time?
Well, the intention with PRIME, it's not to decrease standards, but certainly if there is a possibility to discuss use of surrogate in scientific advice for a PRIME product.
I'm afraid we need to move on. We have certainly later also opportunities to discuss in the margins, but we have still 3 more speakers, and we're approaching 6 o'clock at some point. So the next topic is in a way related to discussions we had also earlier when we came to ATMPs. You heard about the Innovation Task Force, or ITF. We love acronyms at this building here. So somebody who's very closely working with the ITF is Falk Ehrmann. In fact, he's managing the ITF from EMA perspective and therefore best equipped to give you insight how this works. Let me introduce you, Falk. He's a medical doctor by training. He did do a PhD thesis in molecular intracellular cell signaling. Has also explored a bit the area of international law, but since 2004, he's with the agency working in different areas here in oncology, anti-infectives, and also scientific advice. And as I said, now in charge of the Innovation Task Force. Falk, what is this all about?
You should be worried when your boss is asking you that. But so thank you very much for the nice introduction, Michael, and for the nice meeting, Ricardo and Agnes. I'd like to start with a statement, and this is the following. Regulators became gatekeepers and enablers. And there's a constantly changing landscape of research and development. We all experience this. I think it's enough to work 5 or 3 years, and as a regulator, you see how quick things change. And regulators took a proactive approach to address these and to ensure that unmet regulatory needs are followed up. I don't go into details of this one, but one initiative to do so is the Innovation Task Force, which has been created by this agency a couple of years ago. And to try to put into one sentence what it is, it's a multidisciplinary platform for preparatory dialogue and orientation on innovative methods, technologies, and medicines. And I'd like to emphasize the methods and the technologies. It's not only medicines we are talking about here. So what are our objectives? To assist the knowledge exchange within the network, and I understand this morning you learned about the European network, and within the agency, to support drug development via a very early dialogue. So we are working very close with the scientific advice colleagues, what you heard in the previous presentation, on scientific, legal, and regulatory issues. And this I'd like to emphasize as well. We like to address the impact of emerging therapies, so what is new, what might be coming in the next 2 to 5 years to our agency or to our network, and prepare for formal procedures, like scientific advice or other procedures you heard this morning. So what are our applicants, or why does the agency have established this ITF? On the left here you see a graph which nicely illustrates that about 50% or 51% of institutions that had the original idea of a new marketing authorization are SMEs, academics, or private collaboration. So these are really the small entities we deal with. It's not the big pharma. It's not the major 20 pharma companies. These have the ideas. Who brings them into the markets, coming to us and asking for marketing authorizations? These are the big players, the multi-million, $100 million clinical trials, phase 3. But the ideas originate somewhere else, and these we'd like to support with the Innovation Task Force. And on the right, we just see, if we look at the right column, that indeed our clients from the ITF, I might call them so, are mainly academia, small, medium-sized enterprises, which we'll hear later more about, and others. So this network, this internal network, is really multidisciplinary, and I just like to illustrate this with this kind of sun, if you will show. And I'm very grateful that from each office, which is somehow related to what we are doing, we've run representatives which we can consult and involve. And again, I don't go through all of these, just to mention that really regulatory affairs, the legals, the different therapeutic areas, scientific advice, pediatrics, biostatistics, so there's really a vast spectrum who we deal with and who we consult on a case-by-case basis. We don't use all the resources all the time, but just very targeted. Other resources externally are, of course, the network, as we talked, or as you learned this morning, committees, working parties, and experts, research and other public institutions, other EU institutions like the Food Agency, the EFSA, the Chemical Agency, or DG Research, Santé and Growth, which are at the Commission, the departments related to what we do. And of course you, as other international regulators. So we involve FDA, PMDA, Health Canada, Swissmedic, and TGA, just to name a few of them, on a case-by-case basis. One prerequisite of this is always, of course, that confidentiality is checked and we have no conflict of interest. So what are the main tasks we do? What is the main action we do? And I really like to focus on the first one here, on the coordination of briefing meetings. These are informal briefing meetings. We invite the applicant, whoever it is, academia, consortium, or SMEs, to come here or to join us via an Adobe meeting, so a virtual meeting for 1.5 hours to discuss their issues they have. We really try to facilitate and help them on their way through more formal interaction with the regulators. And one prerequisite from the Innovation Task Force, as the name says, it has to be somehow innovative. Now, what is innovation? We can talk about it for ages, and I don't want to elaborate on this one, but we're trying to focus on things that are new, that we don't have in-house already, or that we're not fully prepared yet. This is just a bit of stats, who we see and who's involved in these meetings. So again, if we look at the 2016 column on the left graph, we see that there are almost equal participations of this meeting between the ITF attendees, so the ones who are internal in the building, then other EMA attendees, so knowledge sharing, how we can involve others, then working party experts from our network all over Europe, and industry is misleading, so it should be applicants, because we see a lot of academia here as well. Now, in how far does this translate in somehow other procedures you heard about this morning or what we do? And here again, I like to highlight maybe 2 or 3. So we have around 30 meetings per year, and 80% of these are academia, SMEs, and consortia, so really our target group. And our closest formal procedure would be the scientific advice, what we heard before, and about 1/3 of the applicants we see do consider and do go to scientific advices in the near future. And there are other proportions, for example, advanced therapies, gene, cell, and tissue. I don't know, did we talk about this morning already about this? Oh, okay, we did. So this proportion was, for example, much higher before the CAT was created, before the Committee for Advanced Therapy was created in Europe at the agency, and went down because, of course, the CAT takes a lot of these things over, and we looked into something new, as an example. Other procedures we are preparing for are the qualification of methodologies, and we heard just before about this. And, of course, finally, the marketing authorizations, but these are rather far away. So as a question on Prime maybe before, do you accept in vivo data only or something on HeLa cells? And here we really see everything from quality only up to actually ideas with some substantiation, as long as it is innovative. What is the outcome? We track all of this, and we perform an annual intelligence gathering where we consult different groups within the agency and beyond to really verify that what we identify is something that's not only our own interest, but is really something relevant outside the building and outside the country and Europe. We present this regularly on a monthly basis to our main committee to ensure everybody is aware of what we're doing. We don't hold any meeting without the consensus of the member states. And this results basically in trainings, for example, in awareness sessions, which can be broadcasted as well beyond the EU. We had a couple of those as well. And if even more substantiated, we can ask for workshops or expert meetings or even draft guidance on certain topics. And lately as well, it has an input into the horizon scanning, what the EU network is currently engaging in. So my last slide, the take-home messages are, we are, and this includes you, of course, not only gatekeepers, but we're trying to enable certain product developments. And the EMA, or the European system, is open to discuss scientific, regulatory, and technical aspects of innovative developments, and there we're really trying to encourage you to come and see us as early as possible and facilitate interaction. And yeah, we created the ITF as a tool for an informal, free of charge, early engagement, which hopefully results in further development and further interaction with us and colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks, Falk. Very, very concise again on the ITF activities, how this also builds in with the various areas of scientific advice, orphan medicines, pediatric medicines in development. It's sort of the earlier landing platform, if you will, the earlier landing platform that allows us to engage at a point in time when maybe there's even more uncertainty, there's more direction needed, and therefore to give academia, SMEs, developers more of these ideas, which way to best navigate into the system, which can ultimately become fairly complex, if you will. So open to questions from you to Falk on this topic. Yes, please.
Sue from CDE Taiwan. Just want to ask for the ITF briefing meeting, is that encourage the sponsor to provide their promising maybe phase 1-2 data to show that they maybe have the breakthrough destination to the EMA, and whether it's legal binding or not.
Thank you very much. So this is one example. Indeed, we would like to encourage, of course, to come maybe even before you even consider or think you're eligible for a breakthrough or prime. And everybody can come. We receive, just for the stats a bit, maybe double the meetings we can hold in the end. And we sort a bit of what is innovative, what is promising, what is maybe not our jurisdiction. We don't regulate food, we don't regulate cosmetics here, but there are a lot of borderline products from time to time, and we look into these ones as well. But to answer your question, yes, everybody can come at any stage of development, and we either redirect to other service or we're trying to assist as much as possible by ourselves.
Sponsor have to pay for the fee, meeting fee, or?
It's free of charge.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yes, please.
So Nathalie Strup, DNDI, Drugs for Neglected Disease Initiative. This sounds really interesting, but I wonder how informal or flexible this is versus a scientific advice. I think you said that it was when you had more uncertainties than a scientific advice, so I assume that would be early in development for something new. But what level of preparation do we need in terms, the briefing package, the dates, all the thing? And is it product related or is it disease related more?
Again, I think we're very open here. It can be product or disease or method or technology related. So if you have an innovative manufacturing platform, you increase the yield by 200%. And this is nothing we have seen so far. There must be an innovative aspect in this. Then we are more than open to discuss this. So there was 1 year, I think, we had a lot of meeting on manufacturing, for example, or clinical trial design, biostatistics, some ideas there. And I think we distinguish ourselves very well from scientific advice. And in terms of most of the time, of course, the stage of development, but as well of, I always call it a brainstorming, kind of a brainstorming on specific issues. We don't address questions where you say, does the EMA agree or does the CHMP agree on something? This is not ITF. The ITF is, do you consider other methods beside this suggestion, or do you have any ideas? A bit like this.
And just the process to get this off?
Just write an email to this contact address, what you see right now.
Okay, I guess we have time for 2 more questions. Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm Kondo from Japan. My question is about the Innovation Task Force brief meetings. How does it take time from application to actual meetings so far?
Again, very good question. And this question we get very often. And on purpose, we don't have guidance on this one. So we can organize a meeting in the next 2 hours. But the problem is we want to help you, and we need the expertise. So I think in general, I would say within 6 weeks, when we agree on some questions, we agree on some issues to be discussed, we try to do it. If, for example, you have a deadline of clinical trial submission, something, we can do it much faster. But the goal is that it's a fruitful meeting for you and for us, So to have the right expertise, and this takes some time. So I think within a month.
So it's for an exception, not one of the ones covered by any scheduled meeting plan, and therefore there is a bit more flexibility within. Yes, please. Last question on this.
Alain from MSF Médecins Sans Frontières. Is this something that is open to developers from outside Europe? And I'm thinking more about emerging countries. And if so, did you get any applications from them?
Yes, we definitely get from outside Europe. I must admit, most of them are from US or via consultancy from US, but we get as well from other regions, including Japan and other regions. So it's open to everybody, absolutely everybody.
A certain number of our procedures are open to non-EU companies, academics, and so on. It's only the formal one, which in particular those one will give rise to an incentive, which are reserved to people established in the EU. But otherwise, it's
So, sorry, I meant countries like China, India, Brazil. Yeah.
Good. I think we need to move on to an area of what we call special provisions. And again, you have heard references earlier today with regard to conditional marketing authorization, exceptional circumstances, and these concepts, which have been explained a bit in the regulatory session, will now be explained in more detail by my colleague Sigmar Sebris, who is from the Regulatory Affairs Office here at the agency. He studied medicine and holds also a bachelor degree in law, so quite unusual combination, if I can say. He started with the agency in 2010, has been responsible for some evaluation activities previously, and is now in the Regulatory Affairs Office, where, amongst others, he's overlooking the areas of conditional marketing authorization and exceptional circumstances. So I think a best equipped speaker to help us what this is about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. So, as mentioned today, I will try to give an insight into some of the regulatory tools that underpin the support to addressing unmet medical needs. And if we talk about tools that are in legislation for this purpose, actually there are several. As mentioned today, we will focus on conditional marketing authorization and marketing authorization under exceptional circumstances, which are particular types of marketing authorizations. But there are also others that you have already heard today, like accelerated assessment, which is basis for PRIME, and for instance, compassionate use, which is done at member state level. In addition to the tools, of course, there are other initiatives that build on these tools and provide further support how this can be brought to life. And maybe here I could mention the example of adaptive pathways, which builds on other provisions like conditional marketing authorization, post-authorization measures, scientific advice, use of observational data. And it is essentially a scientific concept of how to develop medicines and how to generate data. It involves a prospective discussion on the development plan involving other stakeholders, in particular health technology assessment bodies. And we recently had a pilot where 18 products out of 62 applications were discussed in such exploratory approach to see how this can be better used in development. And you can also see on our website some further details. But because of the time limitations, we will focus today on the regulatory tools, and then I will also provide some links for further information. If we look at the typical development of medicinal products, of course it consists of generating quality non-clinical data, early clinical data, confirmatory clinical data, after which there is an assessment of the data and providing a regulatory approval, following which there are negotiations about the price reimbursement and actual launch of the product, which eventually provides an access. Now, if we look at the principle of these regulatory tools, let's see what is the main mechanism behind them. So first, regarding the conditional marketing authorization, the idea is that before confirmatory phase 3 studies or confirmatory studies are completed, we brought earlier the assessment and approval process, so approve based on less data. However, we have a framework under which it is still controlled that these confirmatory data are generated after the approval, and at the end we have complete data. there is a provision for marketing authorization under exceptional circumstances. And the slight difference there is that, again, we don't have comprehensive data as normally would be expected when we provide the approval. However, this is for exceptional circumstances and particular cases, and it's actually when it is not possible to generate what would normally be considered comprehensive data. Therefore, instead of having comprehensive data after authorization, there is continuous data collection aimed at maximizing the information that can be obtained on these products. And again, it would have to be seen when this authorization is warranted. Maybe just to bypass and mention another tool is compassionate use, which essentially does not necessarily change the way the development happens, but it provides that at least part of the access based on compassionate use is provided to some patients earlier before the product is authorized. But that in Europe is actually managed at the member states, even though there could be a possibility for a centralized European level discussion and assessment of such approach. Now, if we move to the definitions of the two particular tools of interest today, the conditional marketing authorization, so essentially it's based on less comprehensive data, but the data is generated after the authorization is granted still. And in order to obtain one would need to fulfill 4 criteria and be within the scope. So scope can include seriously debilitating and life-threatening diseases, emergency situations, or the products that are designated as orphan. But also the 4 criteria would need to be fulfilled, and that means that we expect positive benefit-risk balance. We expect that it is possible to generate comprehensive data after authorization. This is reserved to the cases when we expect that unmet medical needs will be addressed, and as well we need to see the balance between benefits of immediate availability and the risks involved with the limitations of the data. The other tool, the marketing authorization under exceptional circumstances, is based most often on rarity. So in this case, the CHMP, in addition to the general provisions for granting authorization like positive benefit-risk balance, etc., is restricted in the sense that it has to be established at least one of these criteria are met in order to grant this authorization based on less data. So it could be the rarity when indications are so rare that it is not reasonably it could not reasonably be expected that such comprehensive data can be generated. It could be related to the current state of scientific knowledge, that we don't know how such data can be generated, or it could be also in some cases linked to the ethics, when it's not ethical to conduct such research that would grant this data. Now, maybe to shortly recap the differences between the two provisions is that the conditional authorization, you would still obtain comprehensive data after authorization, while in exceptional circumstances you will never be able to obtain comprehensive data. You will only try to maximize the information that is possible to obtain. The conditional marketing authorizations later convert to a standard authorization when there is comprehensive data available, while exceptional circumstances in principle are foreseen to remain such indefinitely. Unless something unforeseen happens, we eventually obtain comprehensive data. Conditional authorizations are valid for 1 year, and each year this authorization has to be renewed. While exceptional circumstances, the validity itself is as usual, but there is still an annual look at the benefit-risk balance based on whatever data is generated. And there are some other differences, like conditional is restricted only to centralized procedures, but both of these provisions have specific obligations which request further generation of the data post-authorization. If we look at the overall numbers of these two authorizations under these two provisions, they remain exceptional. It's 10% or below of the opinions for new applications that we receive at the EMA. We see some changes from 1 year to another, maybe from one provision to another, but overall it remains an exceptional provision when this is used. We have also looked at the various therapeutic areas where this has been taken up, and we see that oncology is widely represented both in under exceptional circumstances and conditional authorizations. on the right-hand side, we also looked at those applications which tried to obtain a conditional authorization, but then it didn't succeed so eventually. And I think one other observation here is that for conditional marketing authorizations, we see that it's only few therapeutic areas which have managed to develop this way, have to base the authorization at an earlier stage and later, but with sufficient confidence that the authorization can be granted, and later generate comprehensive data and convert to a standard authorization. So that is possibly an area where we can explore in the future how maybe to make also other therapeutic areas with unmet needs to take benefit of this provision. In the interest of time, I won't spend much detail, but this is about conditional authorizations, and we were looking how the initial expectation, how quickly the data will be generated, will be actually obtain the data for the ones who have managed to do so far. And we concluded that on average it takes 4 years to generate the data. There is high variability between the products. There are occasions when some delays are foreseen, but we overall have seen these as substantiated, and we also have seen relatively good adherence to these obligations imposed, and they also, of course, would be the precondition for a renewal which takes place every year. Just a very short illustration, maybe I included some products to give you an idea what kind of products have been deemed suitable for a conditional marketing authorization. And here actually we speak about a known active substance but in a new condition. So it is a product Votubia which contains everolimus. And this was developed for a rare type of oncology indication in astrocytoma, for the patients which cannot undergo surgery. So the CHMP considered there is an unmet need in lack of non-invasive pharmacological treatments for these patients, and there are no satisfactory treatments. The company came with a phase 2 single-arm study and some additional supportive data, as well as it had an ongoing phase 3 study, which was placebo-controlled. And this is something that we see very often in conditional authorizations. So in order to ensure that this data can be generated, very often these confirmatory studies are already ongoing when the conditional authorization is granted. However, the CHMP concluded that there is clear evidence about reduction in the volume of the tumor. Therefore, it concluded that it would be appropriate to grant this authorization despite the limited numbers and the somewhat early endpoints used for this conclusion. Eventually, after the authorization, the CHMP obtained final results from this ongoing phase 3 study. There were also long-term follow-up from other studies from these studies obtained. And we obtained also more information on other types of endpoints, like, for instance, duration of response, etc. And eventually, the CHMP was able to conclude that this can be converted in a standard marketing authorization. Another example is from the older part of the products is from an HIV product, raltegravir, with the trade name Isentres. And at the time, the situation was that it was targeting the patients who have shown resistance against other existing treatments against HIV. So in this patient population, this product was initially approved following an accelerated assessment, and it was based on 24 weeks of data in phase 3 studies as well as supportive data. And so at that moment, what the CHMP saw is that the response is there and it lasts at least 24 weeks. And the CHMP considered, okay, 24 weeks is maybe not comprehensive, but it is enough to grant a conditional authorization. And eventually, the data from 48 weeks was obtained, and it confirmed these findings. There was also a plan implemented how to monitor development of resistance. And this was converted to a standard marketing authorization. This is a case where there was also an extension of the specific obligations due date, And it was because there was further discussion about the things that needed to be implemented post-authorization, what exactly would be designed, etc. But that was deemed acceptable by the CHMP. And just one short example from exceptional circumstances. So this is another therapeutic area. This is about familial hypercholesterolemia, which is a rare life-threatening disease. But because of the rarity of the disease, the CHMP concluded that essentially it will not be possible ever to generate comprehensive data for these patients in order to follow the usual authorization routes. So the authorization was essentially based on unblinded single-arm study in their exceptional circumstances in the light of unmet need in this population. There was some supportive data as well, and what the CHMP saw as a main conclusion at the time of initial authorization was clear lipid-lowering efficacy in these very limited number of patients. However, there was much larger safety database because the substance was used also in other developments. So with this product, there is continuous prospective observational study ongoing, on which annually the company is providing whatever data is generated, and this so is done every year, and it continues to be monitored whether the benefits outweigh the risks. And this activity doesn't have a particular completion date, so it's expected that we continue to do so. But because of these exceptional circumstances and unmet need, this product was deemed to be warranting an authorization. Now, for further examples and guidance, we can suggest you to go to our website where you can search the products which are authorized under these particular authorization types, and you can access the public versions of the assessment reports which discuss the reasons why each product was authorized. So the products that are with conditional marketing authorization, you can search them in, but also in the results you see there is a C flag, that how you can identify them visually. And similarly with exceptional circumstances, there's a green flag for this particular authorization type if you're interested into more examples on how this was achieved. There are also more general guidance on our website about each authorization type. For conditional authorization, we also conducted a study looking at the 10 years since this provision was introduced in 2006, and there are much more detail in that. But maybe as mentioning another example that you could look at is there is also an overview comparison table between various provisions and tools that we have in order to support early access and addressing of unmet medical needs. When you will eventually receive the electronic versions of the slides, these all contain hyperlinks, so you don't have to search where exactly that is on our website. So you could obtain some further guidance from our website, but of course, questions are welcome.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Sigmar, for this snapshot of these provisions of conditional marketing authorization, exceptional circumstances, with this particular focus here for today. And of course, Sigmar was also giving you some examples, and you will have seen that some of these, they might look a bit dated, if you will. Look at the Zentrus example, for example. This one was roughly 10 years back as well, or 8 years back, and today the development program would look different. You wouldn't wait for the 48-week data. It was just the standard at the time, and it was just to illustrate how the principle work. And in fact, from there, you could see how also development standards have been updated over time. So really look at it from this perspective. Any question? Do you want to make intervention
A short
first?
comment also. Regulators have been accused of not collecting information post-approval, that you make requirement and then nothing happens and things continue to exist. We have actually been very good at collecting the requirement that we have, and we can show that although some are postponed, they are collected exhaustively. So we are following on our obligation. They're not left pending in a cupboard somewhere.
Right. Question on this topic? Or is it exhaustion by now? Yes, please.
I have a question. I hope I'll be able to explain it. But in terms of benefit risk analysis, My understanding is, so thinking about products with some relevance to developing countries, my understanding is that the analysis in the case of conditional approval is done based on a certain number of assumptions in terms of the state of affairs in developed countries, in European countries. For instance, I can think about the standard of care, the pharmacovigilance system, the health system in general, transparency, accountability, the level of awareness of practitioners and patients. These are assumptions that are not necessarily true in many developing countries. And I'm just thinking, if we think about the global role of EMA as one of the leading regulatory agencies, if you think about the recent TB drugs, for instance, that are tremendously needed in many developing countries, do you think that you have a role in thinking of how this benefit risk analysis can take into account also the realities in these countries?
Well, maybe the first limitation that we have is that when we conduct assessment, we cannot take into account the economic arguments. We only need to look at the safety and efficacy of the product and put that into the context. But then, especially if we talk about the tools that are addressing, they are focused on unmet medical needs, of course we have to look at the therapeutic context. And this is where we sort of approach to a certain comparing the new tool with what is already available. Of course, if we speak about applications in a centralized procedure, Europe will become our primary focus, and that's what we need to conclude on. But if we speak about, so for instance, opinions under Article 58, we would certainly would also involve the experts and otherwise try to obtain the information, what is the situation in the markets where these products are intended. And there we would aim to achieve that, but again, of course, it would have to be seen what are the reasons behind, and it wouldn't be we wouldn't start to go into economical analysis that because of the differences in the price, etc. In fact, we don't know the price on the paper. We're not even allowed to ask what will be the price of the new treatment. So we are really focusing on safety and efficacy, but it happens in a certain therapeutic context.
Sorry, actually, I was thinking more about if you think about the pharmacovigilance system. So, in the case of conditional approval, there's a higher risk that is accepted, also based on the idea that the systems that are using these drugs are capable of, basically detecting all the signals, which is not the case in many developing countries. So, for us, we had to put in place actually these systems to be able to use these drugs, which is extremely difficult to manage. So, I'm more talking about this kind of challenges.
This is one of the findings. We had recently, beginning of the first part of the 2017 year, we have discussed with our colleagues, especially from Africa, on the use of our scientific opinions, particularly in the context of Article 58. And clearly, one of the aspects was highlighted is the lack of infrastructure for pharmacovigilance, the lack of monitoring, and the lack of regulatory capacity to enforce in a risk management plan, which would be appropriate for the particular country. So this is something we need to work on, and the kind of thing we need to try to help, where we can build capacity in not duplicating, no need to duplicate vigilance, but maybe ensuring that the data can be used by others than just us.
And maybe just to complement, in particular in case of conditional authorization, of course, if the collection of reliable observational data is not possible for their reasons, it may lead more likely that there will be discussions that more interventional type of studies need to be continued. But again, it's a case-by-case decision.
Okay. I think we need to move on from here and come to another topic where we have heard the acronym now so many times today, the SME, the small and medium-sized enterprises. We had reference to SME earlier today in the orphan medicines, for example, in this arena. We heard it today when Falk Ehrmann was discussing the ITF and SME. So what is this SME area? And I think, Leonor, you're best equipped to tell us about it, because you are scientific officer now in the SME office. So the agency has a dedicated office to provide support to small and medium-sized enterprises. And Leonor is working with the agency now for more than 10 years. She has been working in various areas, including post-authorization, including evaluation activities, including procedure management. She holds a degree in pharmacy, also a master in regulatory affairs. And as I said, she's now in the SME office and can tell us how do we support these developers and what the acronym stands for in the sense of how it's been defined. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, the final session of the day, I hope I can keep your attention. I'm here to talk about a topic that it's really a very important topic in terms of SMEs and innovation. So SMEs, as we have talked all over this session, are a very important source of innovation. And I will go through what we do and what we do to promote the development of innovative products by the SMEs. So everything started with the SME regulation. We'll go through that. What we do at the SME office, some statistics about how we support innovation at the agency, and what is the situation in terms of marketing authorizations from SMEs. So the SME regulation triggered the creation of the SME office and creates incentives for companies. And the important incentives, the most important ones, are at the development stage, because it's believed that we need to push them to try to, that they step up to a higher level and manage to go through the different hurdles and can reach a marketing authorization, so that they don't stay at the ITF phase. So we want them to progress and to be successful. So the SME office created a single contact point that gives assistance to the SMEs, and these assistance can have different forms, can be procedural, administrative, regulatory, and we have also SME briefing meetings that I will go through a bit more in detail, are also one of the aspects of the early interaction with the agency. The SME regulation intends to promote communication between the SMEs and the agency, so to be a bit of an interface, a first interaction, and also coordinates and networks within the EU structures, SME partners, and stakeholders. So what indeed, in reality, the SME office does? One of the most important aspects is that we need to assign the SME status. So we need to qualify companies so that they can afterwards be entitled to the incentives. As I mentioned, we give regulatory assistance. We give important fee incentives. We also give we provide translations at the time of the granting of the marketing authorizations, because it's a big hurdle for companies to provide translations in all the EU languages. We give a lot of training and awareness sessions. We also contribute to partnering and networking, and there is an SME, a public SME register, that when companies submit their declarations, part of that information goes into a public register. So you have their information, general information about the companies that are registered. And also one of the important aspects is reporting and planning. So every year we issue a report on the SME. So what is the profile of the SME, how many SMEs are qualified, and what are the activities that we do to support them at the agency level. We also have activities in terms of planning, and we published this year the SME Action Plan, a 3-year plan that in a way we want to promote awareness of the SME incentives in terms of also training, in terms of interaction, partnering, networking. So it's an interesting document if you have the time to go through it. So go into more detail. How do we do the assignment of the SME status? This assignment is based on the Commission Recommendation 2003-361, which defines micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. And to qualify, there are criteria. A company needs to be established in the European Economic Area and need to meet certain thresholds in terms of head count or in terms of annual turnover and annual balance sheet. So this assignment is based on a declaration, a self-declaration from company, and also where we evaluate the ownership to get all these numbers and then to see whether they really comply or not comply with the definition. In terms of registered SMEs, we have at the moment, end of 2016, around 1,800 companies registered. This number has increased since 2006, so it really reflects the success of the SME initiative. So companies come all over the EU. The countries that have more SMEs registered are UK, Germany, France, Spain, and Italy. Most of them are micro, 41% are micro, and then we have 34% small and 25% medium company, majority working in the human field, but we also have some companies working with vet products. And as I mentioned before, this information is available at the SME public register. So we provide regulatory assistance to SMEs. What is this regulatory assistance? SMEs can just call. We have a helpline number, or can write her an email. Usually they send us an email because then they can provide more detailed information. And they ask questions that can come from eligibility, legal basis, orphan medicines, inspections, pharmacovigilance, legislation, whatever you can think about. Everything comes to us. And we either process it internally within the SME office, or if we have doubts, we interact with the different offices. So one important thing is that the SME office is kind of works in a matrix system. So we don't work by ourselves isolated at the agency. We interact with all the different, I would say with all the EMEA offices. And we will try to get our best to give the correct answers to companies. And the number of assistance has been, and questions that we receive has been increasing all over the years. Incentives are quite important, and as I mentioned before, there are at the level of development very critical in terms of scientific advice, scientific services, inspections, and they can be in terms of fee reduction or fee deferrals, conditional fee exemption, which is a mechanism that we have, that if companies have asked for scientific advice, they've done their development according to the advice, and at the end, if the results are not okay, so they will not get the marketing authorization, they will not need to pay a fee. So it's a big incentive for an SME. And then we have also some incentives in terms of post-authorization and pharmacovigilance activities. And for micro and small companies, we have waiver of the MEDRA licensing fee. In terms of training and awareness, this is also a very important part of our work. One of the most important activities is our SME Info Day. We are trying now to have 2 a year. We had one in March about clinical trial regulation. The next one will be in November, supporting innovative medicines development. So we will talk a lot about ITF, scientific advice, so all that we have been discussing today, because we believe that is in that area that we can really support SMEs. We also produce quarterly newsletters with information that is relevant to and tailored to SMEs. Also announcements, so mailings. We have a list of all our SMEs and we can send them mailings with important information. And I take the opportunity also to promote our SME user guide. So this is a wonderful document. It's made for people that don't have knowledge of our complex regulatory framework. So it explains in a very easy way what are the different steps, what are the regulatory aspects that need to be considered in the evaluation. And therefore, I find this is quite an interesting document to have a first look when people want to interact with the agency. And this document also can forward to more detailed information.
I can add that some of us are using it sometimes when we want to know what we're doing at the agency, because it's very well explained, it's exhaustive, and it's quite useful. So even if you're not an SME, it can be used.
Thank you. I would also like, in terms of supporting innovation, we've talked about ITF, scientific advice. I would like to talk a bit more about SME briefing meetings. What are these briefing meetings? So this is a platform, provides a platform for early discussion, early interaction with the agency. So a company doesn't know how to approach us, has a product or whatever, has some kind of idea and comes to us with the questions. For example, is a product, I don't know what are the steps, what are the milestones, do we need a pediatric, a PIP development plan, do we need to ask, do we have a product for rare diseases, we need orphan designation, we will need scientific advice at a certain point, so what can we do? And what we do is that we organize these briefing meetings that the company give us kind of a briefing document and prepare a slide presentation. So we don't require a very complex preparation, and then we interact with the different offices that are concerned with the questions. We can have prime colleagues, we can have scientific advice, regulatory affairs, pediatrics, inspections, well, whatever the topic, and then we have quite an informal meeting. But I think these meetings have been quite successful, at least the feedback that we receive from the companies. It's quite good, and indeed gives them a guidance and orientation, and then it's easier for them to follow their path and, for example, go through the scientific advice or whatever, do the other interactions, start to interact with the other more formal offices from the agency. This is also free of charge, open to human and veterinary products. In terms of statistics, so just to let you know that 50% of ITF meetings are for SMEs. We have also ITM certification for SMEs. In terms of scientific advice, 26% of scientific advice are done by SMEs. In terms of orphan drugs, drugs for rare diseases, half of the scientific protocol assistant is for SMEs. Yes, prime, half of the application, more or less half and half of it's for SMEs. And at the end, so this is my last slide, in terms of marketing authorization, all the marketing authorization, we have SMEs with marketing authorization, although with mixed results, and they are still struggling, and we have a significant level of withdrawals. One very positive indicator is that we have been experiencing an increase of the number of marketing authorizations submitted by SMEs, and this is quite encouraging. So just to finalize, last, SMEs are a source of innovation, and EMEA remits commit to foster an environment that provides incentive to the SMEs. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonor. And I think this rounds up quite nicely also very specific support. And as Agnes was also saying earlier, we ourselves sometimes we need some support to get explanation to that system which you heard now all day about, and it is really something where one needs to navigate. So this is really a structure to specifically target small, medium-sized enterprises, to give them that helping hand, if you will, and to guide them through the system here. It also has some financial elements in there, that's acknowledged, but I think the regulatory support, the opportunity to have an open door, an address to talk to, is something which colleagues very much appreciate. And therefore it's a very important initiative. based on a specific EU piece of legislation, but here you see how this has been translated into practice and how it's been, what the achievements are. I think we have time for 2-3 questions before I think then the time is pressing for the networking event, but if there's still energy for questions, then happy to take them. And sir, you have energy, so we really should be applauded for this one.
Thank you very much. So I think my question is just that how do you like the SME designation? Is it because is it based on the budget of the company, the number of employees, or other products they are marketing, or what?
Yes. So basically, according to the Commission recommendation, there are thresholds that need to be followed. And one of the important one is the head count. Companies, SMEs need to have less than 250 employees. And also we take into account annual turnover or annual balance sheet. So annual turnover in terms of the sales of the company or in terms of the total annual balance in terms of total assets of the company. So there need to be the annual turnover less than 50 million and the annual balance be less than 43 million. And depending also on the different thresholds, you have medium, small, and micro. But this is based on the Commission recommendation, which is valid for the EU.
This specification between micro, small, and medium is not actually, doesn't make any difference in terms of fee reduction. It's just to be able to see how, if companies are growing, and no, it's more a monitoring element than, it makes no difference in terms of fee incentive for us.
There are certain in terms of pharmacovigilance,
yes,
yeah, but not scientific advice, for example.
Good, thank you. Any other question? Yes, please. I see more energy.
Hi, I'm Kondo from Japan. I hope my question is last, but I understand you have already a lot of menu for support SME. So my question is, what kind of challenges do you have now, and how to handle these matters?
Everything that has been done so far.
What are the challenges? I think is awareness, because still companies are not aware of all the incentives, are not aware of the possibility of having SME briefing meetings, are not fully aware of our legislation. So there are a lot of hurdles, and we need to be closer to them to try to inform them and to let them know about specific incentives that they can benefit.
And ensuring also that at the time of marketing authorization, for those small companies that are the applicant, very often they are bought or they sell their product to a large company. So we don't see them at the time of marketing authorization. But if they reach the marketing authorization, we want them to be successful if they have a good product. And that is where we still have work to be done.
Yeah, and this really all in the interest that we see them as generator for innovation, and that's really the key focus. We see them really in the interest of public health, and that's why we are supporting them specifically as a generator for innovation.